trap was always the same: a lantern in the window, smoke rising from a chimney, the promise of warmth against the merciless Arctic wind. What happened next would rewrite everything authorities thought they knew about survival in Alaska's most remote corners. Late autumn, 1946. The Richardson Highway stretched north through interior Alaska like a thread pulled taut across a frozen wasteland. Truckers and prospectors knew the route well: 200 miles of gravel and permafrost connecting Valdez to Fairbanks, with only scattered roadhouses breaking the monotony. Mile marker 118 sat exactly halfway, where the road bent around a shallow valley carpeted in black spruce. The air there always carried the metallic bite of coming snow, and in winter, the wind howled through the trees with a sound locals swore resembled human screaming. It was here, 3 miles off the highway down an unmarked access trail, that the Evanoff family maintained what they called a traveler's rest station. State records listed the property owner as Dmitry Evanoff, age 47, a fur trapper who'd emigrated from the Aleutian Islands sometime in the late 1920s. His wife, Anya, rarely appeared in official documentation. Their 3 adult children, 2 sons and a daughter, had been born in the territory, though no school records existed for any of them. The family lived in a compound of 3 structures: a main cabin, a smokehouse, and what Dmitry described in his single recorded correspondence with the territorial government as a guest quarters for stranded wayfarers. The U.S. Marshal's office in Fairbanks received the first concerning report on November 8, 1946. A geology surveyor named Robert Kinsley had stopped at the Evanoff place after his truck threw a rod bearing. He accepted their offer of shelter for the night, he told the marshal. But something in the daughter's expression when she served dinner made his scalp prickle. The meat was stringy, grayish. When he asked what it was, Dmitry smiled and said only, "From the land." Kinsley claimed he woke at 3 a.m. to find the eldest son standing in his doorway, not moving, just watching. He dressed quickly, walked into the November darkness, and hiked 6 miles back to the highway rather than stay until morning. Marshal Thomas Wyatt filed the report, but took no action. The territory was full of odd families, he reasoned. Isolation did strange things to people. The second report arrived December 14th. A mail carrier named Agnes Portman told Wyatt she'd been delivering packages along the Richardson route for 9 years and had stopped at the Evanoff cabin dozens of times. But on her December run, she noticed something new: strips of fabric hanging in the smokehouse, visible through gaps in the wooden slats. The fabric looked like clothing, a patchwork of different colors and materials stitched together without pattern or purpose. When she asked Anya about it, the woman's face went blank. "We waste nothing," she said, and closed the door. Wyatt made a note in his ledger. Still, he did not investigate. What finally forced his hand wasn't a report at all, but an absence. 3 prospectors, the Morrison brothers from Oregon, had departed Valdez on December 23rd, bound for a claim near Delta Junction. They'd told multiple people in Valdez they'd be back by January 2nd to celebrate the new year properly. When January 8th arrived with no sign of them, their business partner contacted authorities. The Morrisons were experienced winter travelers. They carried emergency supplies, knew the terrain, and had survived worse conditions. Their truck was found January 11th at mile marker 117, driver's door open, keys in the ignition, half a tank of fuel remaining. Fresh snow had buried most details, but the tire tracks showed the vehicle had pulled off deliberately, not crashed. A single set of boot prints led from the truck toward the tree line before vanishing beneath snowdrift. Those tracks pointed directly toward the Evanoff access trail. But here's what troubled Wyatt most. No one had reported seeing the Morrisons' truck before the snow came. The highway saw sparse but regular traffic. Someone should have noticed an abandoned vehicle, unless it hadn't been abandoned long, unless someone had moved it there. Wyatt assembled a team of 4 deputies and departed Fairbanks on January 13, 1947. The temperature that morning was negative 38 degrees Fahrenheit. They carried rifles, emergency rations, and a portable radio that would prove utterly useless once they left the highway. The access trail was narrower than Wyatt expected, barely wide enough for a vehicle, hemmed in by dense timber that blocked most daylight even at noon. They drove slowly, watching for tracks, for any sign of disturbance. 2 miles in, Deputy Harrison pointed to a spruce trunk, deep gouges in the bark, 4 parallel lines, exactly the width of human fingers. Someone had clawed at that tree. A quarter-mile later, they found the first bone. It lay in the center of the trail, gray-white against the snow, gnawed at both ends. Wyatt picked it up. Human femur, he was almost certain. The marrow cavity was empty, scraped clean. The Evanoff compound came into view moments later. 3 dark structures arranged in a rough triangle, smoke threading from the main cabin's chimney into the colorless sky. Everything looked normal. Everything looked wrong. What waited inside would haunt the Marshal Service for decades, buried in classified files, whispered about in roadhouses from Anchorage to Nome, a story too disturbing for the public record but too persistent to disappear. But first, they had to knock on the door. Before we go further, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? If this story has you hooked already, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. How long do you wait before entering a cabin that might contain a family of cannibals? Marshal Wyatt would have the rest of his life to answer that question. Dmitri Evanoff answered on the 3rd knock, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Understanding what seemed normal in that moment would become the investigator's greatest psychological burden. The main cabin's interior radiated domestic order. Whitewashed walls, a cast-iron stove radiating heat, shelves lined with preserves in mismatched jars. Anya stood at the kitchen counter kneading dough, flour dusting her forearms to the elbows. The daughter, whom Dmitri introduced as Nadia, sat near the window working a needle through leather, repairing what looked like a heavy coat. The 2 sons, Alexei and Pavel, were reportedly out checking trap lines. Nothing about the scene suggested violence. Wyatt would later tell colleagues that this ordinariness was the most disturbing element. Evil wearing the costume of routine. Dmitri spoke English with a thick accent but clear comprehension. Yes, he knew about the missing prospectors. No, he hadn't seen them. Traffic on the access trail was rare this time of year. Most travelers stayed on the main highway. He offered coffee, gestured to chairs by the stove, maintained steady eye contact. Wyatt declined the coffee. Deputy Harrison asked about the bone they'd found on the trail. Dimitri's expression never changed. "Many animals here," he said. "Wolves bring kills near the cabin sometimes. We drive them off, but they leave remains." It was plausible. It was even logical. But Deputy Morrison, younger than the others, fresh from training in Seattle, couldn't stop staring at Nadia's sewing project. The leather pieces spread across her lap were different colors, different textures, stitched together with rough sinew thread. Some patches showed maker's marks. One clearly displayed the corner of a manufacturer's label. Clothing leather, not animal hide. Morrison caught Wyatt's eye. tilted his head slightly toward Nadia's work. Wyatt gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement, then asked Dmitri if they could inspect the other buildings. Standard procedure in missing persons cases, he explained. The family had nothing to hide, surely. Dmitri's smile widened. Of course. We help however we can. He stood, reached for a coat hanging by the door. A heavy parka made of pieced-together materials, brown and gray and dark blue panels creating an irregular patchwork, and led them outside. The guest quarters sat 50 yards from the main cabin, a smaller structure with a single room and no windows. Dmitri explained that travelers appreciated privacy, especially families with children. The door opened inward, hinges groaning. Inside, 2 cots with wool blankets, a small table, an oil lamp, a bucket for waste. Everything clean, everything undisturbed. Too undisturbed, Wyatt noted. No dust on the table surface, despite the cabin supposedly sitting unused since before Christmas. Someone had cleaned recently. The smokehouse stood another 30 yards distant, built lower to the ground with a vented roof and walls of tightly fitted logs. This was where Agnes Portman had seen the fabric strips. Deputy Harrison moved toward it, but Dmitri stepped into his path with surprising speed. Nothing there but fish and venison, Dmitri said. His smile had vanished. The smell is very bad. Not necessary to see. Wyatt placed his hand on his sidearm, not drawing it, just establishing its presence. We'll need to see it anyway. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds. In that interval, Wyatt became aware of how isolated they were. 3 miles from the highway. No radio contact. 4 men against a family whose members might be anywhere in the surrounding forest. The wind had picked up, moaning through the spruce branches. No birds called. Even the smoke from the cabin chimney seemed to hang motionless in the frozen air. Dmitri's shoulders relaxed. As you wish. He walked to the smokehouse and lifted the wooden latch. The smell hit them before the door fully opened. Not the clean scent of cured meat, but something older, sweeter, wrong. Harrison gagged and stepped back. Morrison pulled his scarf over his nose. Wyatt forced himself to breathe through his mouth and look inside. Strips of meat hung from hooks on the ceiling, dark and desiccated. Below them, arranged on a wooden rack, were items that took Wyatt's mind several seconds to categorize. Boots lined up by size, belts coiled like sleeping snakes, 3 wallets stacked in a neat pile, eyeglasses with cracked lenses, a wedding ring on a leather cord, a pocket watch with a shattered face. Personal effects. Not one person's, many people's. And on the back wall, tacked up like hunting trophies, were pieces of clothing. Shirts, trousers, one woman's dress, each item carefully flattened and displayed. Some showed dark stains, some had been cut apart, their usable sections already removed. A child's jacket hung in the corner, small enough for a 10-year-old. Morrison whispered, Jesus Christ. Dmitri stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the white landscape, still smiling that empty smile. We waste nothing, he said, exactly as his wife had told Agnes Portman. The land is hard, the winter is long. We use what God provides. Wyatt drew his weapon. Dmitri Evanoff, you're under arrest for... The bullet took Harrison in the shoulder before Wyatt finished the sentence. The shot came from the tree line, Alexei or Pavel, positioned with a clear angle, likely watching the entire time. Harrison went down hard, blood spraying across the snow in an arterial arc. Morrison dropped to cover behind the smokehouse wall. Wyatt fired twice toward the trees, then grabbed Harrison under the arms and dragged him toward the guest quarters building. Dmitri didn't move. He stood watching them scramble, that smile, finally genuine, and said something in Russian that Wyatt didn't understand. Then he turned and walked calmly back to the main cabin. A second shot punched through Morrison's thigh as he ran for cover. He screamed, a high, desperate sound that echoed off the frozen ground, and collapsed halfway between the smokehouse and the guest quarters. Wyatt and Deputy Richardson laid down covering fire while Deputy Lawson sprinted out, hooked Morrison under the shoulders, and hauled him to relative safety. They'd walked into an ambush disguised as cooperation. 4 lawmen, 2 wounded, pinned down in a building with no windows and 1 door, while somewhere in the trees, 2 expert riflemen established firing positions. The main cabin sat quiet, smoke still rising peacefully from its chimney. Inside, Wyatt knew, Dmitri and Anya and Nadia were probably having dinner. How long could 4 men last against a family who'd survived by hunting humans for years? Night fell at 4:30 p.m., and with it came the sound of footsteps circling the building. The Evanoffs had done this before. Cornering prey, waiting for panic to do the work rifles couldn't. Harrison was losing blood faster than Wyatt could stanch it. The bullet had shattered his clavicle, and fragments had torn through the subclavian artery. Wyatt packed the wound with strips torn from his own shirt, applied pressure until his hands cramped, but the fabric kept soaking through. Harrison's breathing had gone shallow, his lips gray. Morrison's leg wound was cleaner, through and through, missing bone, but he couldn't walk, couldn't run if escape became possible, which left Wyatt and Richardson to hold their position in a 12 by 14-foot room with no sight lines and diminishing options. Richardson was 26, married 8 months, a former Army rifleman who'd served in the Philippines. He'd positioned himself against the wall beside the door, service revolver drawn, listening to the crunch of boots on frozen ground outside. 2 of them, he whispered, circling counterclockwise, staying maybe 20 feet out. Wyatt nodded. Alexei and Pavel, almost certainly. Keeping the lawmen contained while they figured out their next move. The smart play would be waiting for dawn. Let the cold do the work. Let Harrison bleed out. Let desperation push the survivors into tactical mistakes. But at 10 minutes past 5 p.m., something changed. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in from all directions, broken only by Harrison's labored breathing and the wind scraping ice crystals across the roof. Richardson met Wyatt's eyes, raised 1 finger. Hold position. They waited. 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Then Anya's voice, clear and close, directly outside the door. Marshal Wyatt, we want to talk. Richardson tightened his grip on his revolver. Wyatt shook his head. Don't engage. Standard protocol in hostage situations. Never negotiate through barriers, never show weakness, never accept the captor's framing of reality. Anya continued as if he'd answered. You're thinking we are monsters. This is fair. But you don't understand context. You don't understand history. Her English was better than Dimitri's, almost accentless. Wyatt filed that detail away. Educated, possibly American-born despite the Russian surname. Someone who'd chosen this life rather than been born into it. The winter of 1937, Anya said, was the coldest on record. Negative 62 degrees for 11 straight days. Our traps yielded nothing. The salmon runs had failed. Dmitri went to Fairbanks for supplies. The territorial office promised emergency provisions for homesteaders. They gave him nothing. Said we should have planned better. Should have saved more. Should leave if we couldn't manage. Morrison had passed out from pain or blood loss. His breathing was regular but weak. Richardson checked his pulse. gave Wyatt a thumbs up. Still alive. We had a son then, Anya continued. Little Mikhail, 4 years old. He starved to death on January 18th, 1938. Weighed 26 pounds when we buried him. His ribs showed through his skin like ladder rungs. The wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners. 3 days later, a surveyor came down our trail, lost, looking for the highway. Dmitri invited him to dinner. The man ate, he slept, and when morning came, she paused. Wyatt could picture her standing out there in the darkness, probably armed, possibly flanked by her sons, calculating how much truth would serve her purpose. When morning came, we didn't starve anymore. There it was, the origin story, the justification. Wyatt had seen it before in other cases, the moment when ordinary people crossed a line and then rebuilt their entire moral framework to accommodate the crossing. The surveyor hadn't been murder, he'd been necessity. And once necessity justified the first killing, it justified the second, the third, the 20th. How many travelers had vanished on this trail over the past 9 years? Richardson scrawled a note on the back of a citation pad, held it up for Wyatt. Stalling. Planning something. Wyatt nodded agreement. Anya wasn't confessing out of guilt or seeking understanding. She was buying time, probably while Dmitri or the sons positioned for a better shot or prepared some other tactic. Your deputy needs medical attention, Anya called. We can provide it. We have supplies. We have knowledge. Let us help him, and we can discuss terms. Richardson's expression said exactly what Wyatt was thinking. They want us to open the door. Once the door opened, rifles would finish the job in seconds. 4 bodies added to however many already fed the Evanoff smokehouse. The deputies' weapons and supplies scavenged. Their truck driven back to the highway and abandoned, creating another mystery for some future investigator. The family had refined this process to routine. We're not opening the door, Wyatt Theitsis called back. Federal marshals are already en route. Backup will arrive by dawn. Your best option is surrender. A lie, but a necessary one. No one knew they were here. The radio didn't work. If they died in this cabin, it might be days before anyone came looking. Anya's laugh cut through the darkness. Genuine amusement, not performative. Marshal, we've lived 3 miles from civilization for 18 years. No one comes. No one cares. The territory is too big, too wild. People disappear here like snow in spring, completely, without trace. She wasn't wrong. Alaska Territory in 1947 was still largely unmapped, ungoverned, a place where entire families could vanish into the wilderness and leave no bureaucratic footprint. The Evanoffs had understood this, exploited it, built a hunting ground in plain sight of a highway that might as well have been on another planet. Last chance, Anya said. Open the door. Let us help your man, or wait for morning and bury 2 bodies instead of 1. Richardson leaned close, whispered directly into Wyatt's ear. The roof. Ventilation gap. If I boost you, can you reach it? Wyatt looked up. Yes, a 6-inch gap where the roof met the walls, designed to prevent moisture buildup. Too small for a person to fit through, but wide enough to angle a gun barrel, maybe get a sight line on whoever stood outside. He nodded. Richardson interlaced his fingers, creating a stirrup. Wyatt holstered his revolver, stepped into Richardson's hands, and let himself be lifted toward the ceiling. His head reached the gap. He pulled his weapon, pressed his face against the rough logs, and peered out into the darkness. Anya stood 15 feet from the door, exactly where her voice had placed her. But she wasn't alone. Nadia stood beside her, holding what looked like a mason jar filled with liquid, and behind them, barely visible in the starlight, Alexei held a torch, actual fire on a wrapped branch, primitive but effective. They were going to burn them out. Wyatt aimed carefully, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the frozen air. Anya dove left, the jar tumbling from Nadia's hands and shattering against the ground. The sharp smell of kerosene flooded the clearing. Alexei swung the torch in a wide arc and hurled it toward the cabin. It landed 3 feet from the wall, flames licking at the kerosene-soaked snow, spreading in a bright pool that cast dancing shadows across the compound. Not enough to catch the building yet, but they had more jars, more fire, more time than the deputies had ammunition. Richardson lowered Wyatt back to the floor. How bad? They're going to cook us alive. Outside, Dmitri's voice joined the chorus for the first time since the shooting began. He spoke Russian, a long, rolling sentence that sounded almost like prayer. Then, in English, "The land provides. The land takes back. This is balance." The second jar shattered against the cabin wall. Flames climbed the eastern wall like living things, hungry and deliberate. What the Evanoffs didn't know was that Richardson had learned about fire in the Philippine jungles and how to fight it. The guest quarters had been built with green timber years ago, logs that had dried and seasoned until they'd become perfect kindling. Wyatt could hear the wood beginning to pop and hiss as heat found pockets of trapped resin. Smoke seeped through the gap between roof and walls, thin gray tendrils that would thicken quickly once the fire established purchase. They had minutes, maybe less, before the choice became burn or run. Morrison stirred, consciousness returning in fragments. "What's—" He smelled the smoke, understood instantly. "Oh, God." Richardson was already moving. He grabbed one of the wool blankets from the cot, tore it lengthwise with his knife, and thrust half toward Wyatt. "Soak it. Your canteen. Everything you've got." They worked fast, emptying their water supplies onto the wool until both pieces dripped. Richardson wrapped his around his head and shoulders. "The door faces west. Fire's on the east wall. We go low and fast. Straight for the tree line, not the trail. Thick timber, harder to track, harder to shoot." Wyatt understood the mathematics of it. Harrison couldn't move. Morrison could barely crawl. That left 2 able-bodied men to either die together or create enough chaos that maybe one survived to bring help. He looked at Harrison, who'd gone pale as candle wax, barely breathing. The deputy's eyes were open but unfocused, seeing something beyond the cabin walls. Dying, almost certainly. Maybe already gone in every way that mattered. Morrison gripped Wyatt's arm. "Leave me, both of you run. I'll cover as long as I can." "You can't even stand." "Don't need to stand to pull a trigger." Morrison's voice was steady, despite the pain etched in every line of his face. "I've got 6 rounds. I'll make them count. You get to Fairbanks, you come back with 20 men and put these bastards in the ground." Richardson checked the door. Solid wood, simple latch, no lock. "On 3, I go first, draw fire. Wyatt, you break left, I'll break right. Don't stop, don't look back, don't engage unless you have a clean shot." Outside, another jar shattered. The fire roared louder, feeding on kerosene and timber and the wind that funneled through the compound. Wyatt could feel heat through the wall now, radiating inward, turning the cabin into an oven. Harrison's breathing stopped, just stopped, between one exhale and where the next should have been. No dramatic final moment, no last words. He simply wasn't alive anymore. Wyatt checked for a pulse anyway, found nothing, and forced himself to move past it. Grieve later, survive now. 1, Richardson counted. Morrison propped himself against the wall, revolver raised, aiming at the door. Blood soaked his pant leg and pooled beneath him, but his hands were steady. 2. Wyatt wrapped the wet wool around his head, took 3 deep breaths, and drew his weapon. 3. Richardson kicked the door open and lunged into the night. Muzzle flash erupted from 2 directions simultaneously, Alexei from the north, Pavel from the south, both positioned exactly where experienced hunters would wait for prey to bolt. Richardson took a round in the side, spun, kept running. Wyatt dove left as planned, hit the snow rolling, came up firing toward the northern muzzle flash. Morrison's gun barked from inside the cabin, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Someone screamed, high-pitched, possibly Nadia. Wyatt ran. The tree line was 40 yards away, 40 yards of open ground across snow that crunched and squeaked with every step, advertising his position to anyone with ears. A bullet kicked up powder 6 inches from his left boot. Another splintered a spruce branch at head height as he crashed into the timber. He kept moving, weaving between trunks, branches whipping his face, legs pumping until his lungs burned. Behind him, Morrison's gun fired 3 more times, then fell silent. Wyatt didn't look back. He ran deeper into the forest, following no trail, just putting distance between himself and the compound. 100 yards. 200. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale like swallowing broken glass. He stumbled over a buried root, nearly fell, caught himself against a tree trunk, and stopped. Listened. Someone was following, one person moving fast but not recklessly, staying maybe 50 yards back. Alexei or Pavel, tracking him through the darkness using skills honed by years of hunting in this exact terrain. Wyatt was a federal marshal, trained in urban pursuit and basic wilderness survival. His pursuer had grown up here, knew every trail, every ravine, every trick the landscape could offer. This was their hunting ground. He was just another lost traveler. Wyatt forced his breathing to slow, pressed himself against the trunk of a massive spruce, and tried to think tactically. His revolver held 4 rounds. He'd fired twice at the compound. No spare ammunition, no radio, no backup. Richardson might be alive, might be dead, might have escaped, or might be bleeding out somewhere in the opposite direction. The footsteps came closer. Wyatt could hear his pursuer's breathing now, steady and controlled. Could hear the soft rustle of clothing against branches. Could hear, impossibly, humming. Someone was humming a tune, wordless and eerie, while tracking a man through darkness. The humming stopped. Marshal Wyatt. Alexei's voice, lightly accented, younger than expected. I can hear your heart beating, smell your sweat. You're 50 feet ahead, behind the big spruce with the broken top. 60 feet, actually, but close enough to be terrifying. My father says you're a smart man, smart enough to know you can't win this. The forest is our church. We know every tree, every stone. You'll run until exhaustion takes you, or until you make a mistake, and then you'll feed the land like all the others. Wyatt's mind raced through options. Ambush. Wait for Alexei to pass. Get behind him. 1 clean shot. Risk, if he missed. If Alexei was better trained. If Pavel was also tracking from another angle. Run, deeper into the wilderness, hoping to find the highway, hoping not to freeze first. Risk. The temperature was dropping. His clothes were sweat-soaked. Hypothermia would set in within hours. Fight or flight, the oldest calculation. He chose option 3. Your mother told me about Mikhail, Wyatt called out. About the winter you lost him. That's a hard thing. No parent should bury a child. Silence. Then, you think sympathy will save you? I think you were 4 years old when it started. Old enough to remember what normal looked like. Old enough to know this isn't it. More silence. Wyatt couldn't tell if his words were landing or just buying seconds. How many? Wyatt continued. How many people have you killed? 20? 30? Do you remember their faces? Do you remember the first one? The first one tried to steal from us. Alexei's voice came from a different angle now. He was moving, circling. Came into our home, ate our food, then tried to take supplies while we slept. My father caught him. The man pulled a knife. My father had no choice. And the second one? The third? The Morrison brothers. What did they try to steal? They were in the wrong place. The wrong place. That's what you tell yourself? Wyatt shifted position, trying to track Alexei's voice. You're 23, 24 years old. You've spent your entire adult life murdering travelers and pretending it's survival. That's not living. That's just dying slowly. A branch cracked. Close. Too close. You're right, Alexei said, and he was directly behind Wyatt now, somehow having circled completely undetected. It is dying slowly. We're all dying slowly, Marshal. Some of us just feed the land while we do it. Wyatt spun, raising his revolver, and found himself staring at Pavel, not Alexei. The younger brother had been the distraction, the voice drawing his attention, while the elder had moved in from the opposite direction. Pavel held a rifle, barrel aimed center mass, finger on the trigger. They stood like that for 3 heartbeats, predator and prey, both knowing how this ended. Then a gunshot cracked through the forest, and Pavel's head snapped back in a spray of dark mist. Richardson emerged from the shadows, blood-soaked and swaying, rifle still raised. Sometimes the dead refuse to lie down, and sometimes that refusal changes everything. Pavel's body collapsed into the snow without ceremony, the rifle tumbling from his hands. Wyatt dove for it, grabbed it, spun toward where Alexei's voice had been, but the forest had gone silent. No footsteps, no breathing. The elder brother had vanished like smoke. Richardson staggered forward, pressed one hand against the wound in his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, black in the starlight. Followed the screaming, he managed. Morrison bought us, maybe 5 minutes. You should be dead. Bullet hit my belt buckle first, slowed it down, cracked ribs, maybe punctured something, but... He coughed, spat blood. But I can still shoot. They stood back to back in the wilderness. 2 wounded lawmen with a family of cannibals somewhere in the darkness. Pavel's rifle gave them range advantage. A Winchester Model 70, 10 rounds in the magazine, scope mounted. Professional equipment. Wyatt wondered which traveler it had been taken from, whose last moments had involved begging while this weapon was aimed at their head. Compound's burning, Richardson said. Saw it through the trees. Guest quarters is gone. Main cabin caught. Smokehouse too. That changed the equation. The Evanoffs were losing their base, their supplies, their carefully constructed hunting blind. They'd be desperate now. Unpredictable. Desperation made people dangerous, but it also made them sloppy. Or it should have. The problem was that desperation was their natural state. They'd survived the brutal winter of '37 through desperation. They'd maintained this nightmare for 9 years through desperation. This wasn't panic. This was their element. We need to move, Wyatt said. Put distance between us and them. Get back to the highway. Flag down help. 3 miles through forest. At night. Below zero. With him out there. Richardson nodded toward the darkness where Alexei had disappeared. We won't make it. Then what's your plan? Richardson's smile was grim. We finish it. All of them. Tonight. It violated every protocol in the Marshal Service handbook. They were supposed to apprehend, not execute. Supposed to bring suspects before courts and juries, not serve as judge and executioner in frozen wilderness. But the handbook was written by men in warm offices who'd never tracked killers through darkness while bleeding from gunshot wounds. Sometimes the handbook didn't apply. Wyatt checked Pavel's rifle, worked the bolt, confirmed 10 rounds ready. Guest quarters had 2 cots. Main cabin probably sleeps 5. Smokehouse was storage only. Where do they go when their home burns? Richardson considered. Supply cache. Anyone who lives this remote has a backup. Food, weapons, shelter. Probably within half a mile. Close enough to reach quickly, but far enough that fire won't spread to it. So we find the cache. So we wait at the cache. Richardson's tactical mind was still working despite the blood loss. They'll go there. Have to. It's February in Alaska. -30 at night. They need shelter or they freeze. We get there first. We have the advantage. The wind shifted, carrying smoke and something else. Voices, arguing in Russian. Dmitri and Anya, somewhere to the northeast, moving away from the burning compound. Alexei would be with them, or scouting ahead, or circling back to find his brother's body. Nadia was the variable. Morrison had shot someone during the initial chaos. Wyatt had heard the scream, definitely female. If he'd hit Nadia, if she was wounded or dead, that changed the family's psychology. Grief made people irrational. Even cannibals grieved. We follow the voices, Wyatt decided. Stay 50 yards back. When they reach the cache, we wait for them to settle. Then we end it. They moved through the forest like ghosts, using skills neither had employed since military service. Richardson had been a sniper in the Pacific Theater, accustomed to patience and precision. Wyatt had done fugitive retrieval in the Appalachian Mountains, tracking moonshiners through terrain not unlike this. Both men understood how to move silently, how to use terrain, how to become part of the landscape. The voices grew clearer as they closed distance. Dmitri was giving orders, sharp, clipped Russian that needed no translation. Anya responded, her tone defiant. They were arguing about something, disagreeing on strategy. Good. Discord bred mistakes. 20 minutes of careful pursuit brought them to a ravine, steep-sided and narrow, with a frozen creek bed at the bottom. On the far side, barely visible through the trees, stood a small structure, more bunker than cabin, built low and partially buried, designed to hold heat and avoid detection. The supply cache. Dmitri reached it first, pulled open a heavy door, and disappeared inside. Anya followed. Then Alexei supporting someone between them, Nadia limping badly, left arm hanging useless. Morrison's bullet had found flesh after all. That left 3 able combatants and 1 wounded. 4 total. Wyatt and Richardson positioned themselves on the ravine's edge, 60 feet from the cache entrance, with clear sight lines and cover behind a fallen log. The Winchester's scope gave them advantage even in darkness. Richardson took the rifle, settled into shooting position, controlled his breathing despite the pain. Center mass on whoever comes out first, Wyatt whispered. I'll provide backup with the revolver if anyone runs. They waited. Cold seeped through their clothes, numbing fingers and toes. Richardson's wound had stopped bleeding actively, but the damage was done. He'd lost too much blood, moved too hard, pushed too far. His hands trembled slightly as he aimed. Not enough to miss at this range, but enough to worry Wyatt. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then the cache door opened. Alexei emerged first, carrying firewood, head on a swivel. He'd learned caution from Pavel's death. Smart, but not smart enough. Richardson's finger tightened on the trigger and stopped. Because behind Alexei came children, 3 of them, between 8 and 12 years old, bundled in oversized coats and looking terrified. They huddled close to Anya, who ushered them toward a fire pit near the cache entrance. "What the hell?" Richardson breathed. Wyatt's mind raced through implications. Children. The Evanoffs had children beyond their adult sons and daughter. Young ones, hidden away, never mentioned in any report. Were they victims? Captives taken from travelers? Or were they born into this nightmare, raised to view murder as normal? Did it matter? Could they shoot into a group that included children? Anya knelt beside the smallest child, a girl, maybe 8, and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. The tenderness in the gesture was jarring, completely at odds with the monster who'd tried to burn them alive hours earlier. She stroked the girl's hair, murmured something soothing, kissed her forehead. Then she looked directly at the fallen log where Wyatt and Richardson lay hidden. "Marshal Wyatt," she called across the ravine. "I know you're there. I can see your breath in the cold. If you're going to shoot, do it now. But know that you'll be killing children along with monsters." The trap had reversed. They'd thought themselves hunters, but they'd walked into a final, devastating ambush, not of bullets and fire, but of moral impossibility. The children stared across the ravine with eyes that had seen too much. Every lawman eventually faces the moment when justice and morality stop aligning, when the right choice and the legal choice become different things entirely. Wyatt kept his revolver trained on Anya, but didn't fire. Richardson's rifle remained steady, scope centered on Alexei's chest, finger resting beside the trigger guard. The standoff stretched into its 2nd minute, then its 3rd. The children didn't move. Anya didn't flinch. Dmitri remained inside the cache, invisible but undoubtedly armed. "Lower your weapons," Anya said. "Come down and talk. No one else needs to die tonight." Richardson whispered without moving his lips. "She's stalling. Dimitri's flanking." Almost certainly true. Every second they hesitated gave the Evanoffs time to maneuver, to position, to turn this confrontation into another massacre. But every tactical advantage they held collapsed against the reality of 3 children standing in potential crossfire. The 8-year-old girl began to cry, soft, hitching sobs that carried across the frozen air. The boy beside her, maybe 10, put his arm around her shoulders. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 12, kept her gaze locked on the tree line where Wyatt and Richardson hid. Her expression wasn't fear, it was calculation. She'd been taught to hunt, too. "Who are they?" Wyatt called out, keeping his weapon aimed. "Where did they come from?" "They're ours," Anya replied. "Born here, raised here. They know no other life. You're teaching them to kill. I'm teaching them to survive. The world is cruel, Marshal. You of all people should understand that. You enforce laws written by men who've never been hungry, never been desperate, never watched a child starve because civilization decided they weren't worth saving." Her voice carried no anger, just flat certainty. "We didn't choose this. It chose us." Richardson coughed, wet, rattling. Blood flecked his lips. His wound was worse than he'd admitted, probably bleeding internally. They were running out of time. "The Morrison brothers," Wyatt said, playing for seconds while his mind worked the problem. "What did they do to deserve death?" "They saw us." Simple, direct. On the highway, they saw our truck, saw Pavel loading supplies, asked questions, smart questions. They would have reported us, brought authorities, ended everything. Anya gestured to the children. Would have put these three in government orphanages, separated them, broken them. I've seen what happens to our kind in those places, seen how they civilize the ones who don't fit. Our kind, meaning what? Russians, Alaskans, cannibals. You killed 3 men to avoid investigation. I killed 3 men to protect my children. You'd do the same. Would he? Wyatt wanted to believe otherwise, but he'd seen enough darkness in 12 years of law enforcement to know that certainty was a luxury. People committed atrocities for love more often than hate. The worst monsters in history usually believed themselves heroes. Movement in his peripheral vision. Dmitri, emerging from the trees 30 yards north. Rifle raised but not aimed. Flanking maneuver completed. Now both lawmen had weapons on them from multiple angles. The children stood in the center, human shields whether intentional or not. "Here's what happens next," Dmitri said, his accent thicker in the cold. "You put down guns. We put down guns. We talk like civilized people. Find solution that doesn't involve more death." "The solution is arrest," Wyatt said. "Trial, prison. That's how civilization works." "Civilization?" Dmitri almost laughed. "You burned our home, killed our son, hunted us through our own forest, and you speak of civilization." Pavel's death had been self-defense, legally justified. But try explaining legal doctrine to a father whose son lay dead in the snow. Justice and vengeance wore the same face when you squinted. Richardson's breathing was getting shallower. 10 minutes, maybe 15 before he passed out. Wyatt needed to force resolution before they lost all advantage. "Dmitri," he called, "I'll make you an offer. One time only. The children walk away. You let them go. Send them toward the highway with supplies and warm clothes. They flag down help, get taken into protective custody. Then we settle this between adults." Protective custody. Anya's laugh was bitter. "You mean prison. You mean tearing them from the only family they know, putting them in cages, teaching them to hate themselves for how they were raised. Better than teaching them to eat people." The oldest girl spoke for the first time, her voice clear and hard. "We don't eat people. We use what the land provides. There's a difference." 12 years old and already fully indoctrinated, Wyatt felt something close to despair. You could arrest the Evanoffs, execute them, burn every trace of their existence. But the children would carry the ideology forward. They'd grow up, have children of their own, teach them that survival justified anything. The infection would spread, unless someone broke the cycle here, tonight, in this frozen ravine. "The difference," Wyatt said carefully, speaking to the girl, "is that people aren't land. They're not animals. They're someone's father, someone's brother. The men your family killed. They had families too. Children waiting for them. Wives who'll never know what happened." The girl's expression flickered. Doubt, maybe, or the first crack in her certainty. But Anya moved to block her view, placing herself between daughter and lawman. "Don't listen to him, Vera. He wants to make you ashamed of survival. Wants you to believe we're monsters for refusing to die quietly." Vera. A name. That made it worse somehow. Richardson slumped against the log, barely conscious. "Make the call," he whispered to Wyatt. "Whatever you're gonna do. The call. Shoot, and hope to hit adults while avoiding children in dim starlight. Surrender and hope the Evanoffs honored an agreement from people who'd murdered dozens. Run and abandon Richardson. Flee into wilderness with killers tracking. All bad options. Wyatt chose the fourth path. Truth. "Anya," he said, lowering his weapon slightly, not holstering it, but showing willingness to de-escalate. "You're right. The system failed you in 37. Should have helped. Didn't. That's a stain on everyone who could have acted and chose not to. But the system failed the Morrison brothers too. Failed Gabriel Kinsley, the surveyor. Failed every person who came down your trail looking for help and found death instead. At some point, the initial wrong doesn't excuse the ongoing wrong. At some point, you became the thing you hated." Silence. The wind had died completely, leaving only the soft crackle of fire and the ragged breathing of 5 wounded people. Dmitri lowered his rifle. "You want confession? Fine. Yes, we killed. Many times. For years. This is true. But law is fantasy out here, Marshal. Territory is too big, too wild. Your government claims authority, but provides nothing. No protection, no support, no justice. We created our own justice, fed our family, survived, by making other families not survive. Yes, no hesitation, no shame. This is what survival looks like when civilization abandons you." The 12-year-old, Vera, was staring at her mother now, really looking, maybe seeing her clearly for the first time. Children were resilient, but not infinitely so. At some age, they started questioning, started measuring what they'd been taught against what they observed. Maybe 12 was that age. "Mama," Vera said quietly, "the people in the smokehouse, the ones whose things you kept, were there children?" Anya didn't answer immediately. That pause told Vera everything. "Were there?" Vera's voice cracked. "Sometimes," Anya admitted. "Families traveled together. We couldn't—" She stopped, herself, perhaps realizing that any explanation would sound monstrous. Vera took a step backward, then another. The younger children watched her, confused, beginning to mirror her retreat. Dmitri saw his family fracturing and made his final play. He raised his rifle toward the children and said, "No one leaves." A father pointing a rifle at his own children. This was the calculus of monsters realizing their empire was collapsing. What happened in the next 11 seconds would be dissected by federal investigators for months. But the only witnesses who survived would never fully agree on the sequence. Wyatt fired first, instinct overriding thought, muscle memory from a dozen prior confrontations where hesitation meant death. The round caught Dmitri high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. His rifle discharged into the air, the crack echoing off the ravine walls. Vera screamed and dove toward her siblings, covering them with her body. Richardson, operating on nothing but will and training, swung the Winchester toward Alexei. But Anya was faster. She'd anticipated this moment, planned for it, kept a pistol hidden in her coat. She fired 3 times, 2 rounds hitting the log, 1 catching Richardson in the throat. He went down without a sound. Alexei charged across the ravine, roaring, moving with the speed and fury of someone who'd lost brother, home, and future in a single night. Wyatt shot him twice, chest and abdomen, but momentum carried him forward. They collided, went down hard, Alexei's hands finding Wyatt's throat even as blood poured from his wounds. Dying men possessed terrible strength. Wyatt couldn't breathe, couldn't dislodge the grip, couldn't reach his weapon. His vision started to tunnel. Alexei's face was inches away, teeth bared, eyes already glazing but still fighting. The world narrowed to those hands, that pressure, the growing darkness. Then Alexei jerked backward, released his grip, and collapsed. Nadia stood behind him, holding a knife, expression unreadable. She'd stabbed her own brother in the kidney. Wyatt sucked in air, rolled away, fumbled for his revolver, found it, swung toward Nadia. She raised both hands, the knife falling into the snow. "Enough," she said simply. Across the clearing, Dmitri had collapsed beside the fire pit, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Anya knelt beside him, not attending his wound, but staring at Richardson's body with something like regret. The three young children huddled together near the cache entrance, untouched physically, but shattered in every other way. Vera's face was wet with tears. The youngest had stopped crying, gone silent and still. The 1,000-yard stare that Wyatt had seen on soldiers, refugees, anyone who'd witnessed more horror than their mind could process. 4 Evanoffs dead, Pavel, Alexei, and Morrison and Harrison. 6 bodies total, 6 families who'd received telegrams and folded flags and incomplete explanations. The fire crackled. Wind stirred the trees. And in the terrible silence that followed violence, Wyatt became aware of a sound he hadn't noticed before. Distant engines, multiple vehicles, echoing across the frozen landscape. Headlights appeared on the highway, 3 miles away, but visible through the winter bare trees. A convoy, 4, 5, maybe 6 trucks, moving fast toward the Evanoff access trail. Anya saw them too. She laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "You're back up, finally. Only 6 hours too late." "Who called them?" Wyatt's voice was hoarse from near strangulation. "I did." Nadia still held her hands up, non-threatening. "Before the burning started, used the radio in the guest quarters while you were all focused on the smokehouse. Called Fairbanks, told them federal marshals were under attack, gave them coordinates. Why? Because I'm tired. Simple, devastating. Tired of the hunting, tired of the pretending, tired of becoming my parents." She looked at Dmitri, then at her mother. "You taught us that survival was everything, but you never asked what we were surviving for." The engines grew louder. Dmitri tried to stand, failed, slumped back against the cache wall. Anya remained motionless, all fight drained from her. The woman who'd orchestrated murders for 9 years, who'd burned men alive and justified atrocity as necessity. She looked suddenly small, exhausted, finished. Wyatt checked Richardson's pulse, found nothing. Another good man dead, another family destroyed. The math of law enforcement never balanced. You could arrest 1,000 criminals, and it wouldn't bring back 1 victim. The convoy was closer now, maybe a mile out. Wyatt could distinguish individual vehicle lights. Someone would have medical training, radio communications, the infrastructure of civilization. They'd arrest the survivors, document the scene, collect evidence. The machinery of justice would turn, slow and imperfect, but turning nonetheless. "The children," Wyatt said to Nadia, "they didn't choose this. Neither did we." She lowered her hands slowly. "I was 4 when it started. Same age as Mikhail when he died. I don't remember normal. I don't remember a time when we didn't." She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. Vera had stopped crying. She stood, helped the younger children to their feet, and walked them away from the fire. Not running, not hiding, just creating distance from parents who'd proven themselves capable of anything. The 10-year-old boy looked back once, face full of questions he'd spent years trying to answer. The convoy reached the access trail, turned down it, lights strobing through the forest. Voices called out. Federal marshals, territorial police, maybe even military. Someone had taken the threat seriously, mobilized resources, sent an overwhelming response. Dmitri coughed blood and spoke for the last time. Tell them we were trying to survive. That's all. Just survive. Everyone's trying to survive, Wyatt said. It doesn't make murder righteous. No. Dimitri's eyes were unfocusing, but it makes it understandable. He died without ceremony, bleeding out in the snow beside a fire that provided no warmth, in a place he'd turned into a graveyard masquerading as home. Anya didn't speak again. She sat with her husband's body, held his hand, and waited for authorities to arrive. When they did, 12 armed men crashing into the clearing, weapons drawn, shouting commands. She stood calmly and placed her wrists together for cuffing. Nadia surrendered without resistance. The children were wrapped in blankets, carried to warm vehicles, given hot coffee and quiet reassurances from people who had no idea what to say to kids raised by cannibals. Wyatt gave his statement 3 times to 3 different officers, each repetition sounding more surreal. He walked them through the smokehouse, watched forensic teams photograph the hanging meat and personal effects, counted wallets, 23. 23 confirmed victims, likely more who'd never carried identification or whose remains had been too thoroughly consumed to leave evidence. They found Pavel's body in the forest, Alexei's in the ravine. Harrison and Richardson were zipped into bags and loaded into a truck. Morrison, brave, doomed Morrison, was retrieved from the burned guest quarters, identified only by his badge. The investigation would take months. Federal prosecutors would build cases. Anya would stand trial, likely hang. Nadia's cooperation and evident remorse might earn her prison instead of execution. The children would enter the foster system, adopted under false names, given fresh starts that could never fully erase what they'd witnessed. And somewhere in a government archive, this case would be filed away, referenced occasionally by criminologists studying familial violence or survival cannibalism, but never fully explained. Because how do you explain ordinary people transforming into monsters? How do you draw the line between desperate and depraved? How do you measure the weight of a starving child against the lives of 23 strangers? Wyatt never found satisfactory answers. He retired from the Marshal Service in 1951, moved to Oregon, spent his remaining years running a hardware store and trying to forget the smell of that smokehouse. He died in 1973, and his obituary mentioned distinguished service but included no specifics. The Evanoff case remained classified until 1998, when academic researchers petitioned for access under Freedom of Information laws. Even then, most documents were redacted. The children's identities stayed sealed. Nadia's testimony stayed sealed. The full scope of the horror stayed sealed. What emerged was a sanitized version. Isolated family, harsh conditions, tragic outcomes. The newspapers that covered it focused on the wilderness angle, the survival aspect, anything but the uncomfortable truth that civilization's edges were sharper than anyone wanted to admit. The access trail was bulldozed in 1949. The land where the compound stood was incorporated into state forest, unmarked, unmemorialized. Hikers occasionally camp there, unaware they're sleeping above graves. And sometimes, especially on winter nights when the wind sounds almost like screaming. Locals swear they can still smell smoke drifting from the woods. Not wood smoke, but something older. Something that doesn't belong to any fire humans should kindle. The land provided, Dmitri had said. The land takes back. Maybe it's still taking. The next case runs even deeper into territory you won't believe existed. Subscribe before it drops, because we're only beginning to scratch the surface of what humanity is capable of when the rules disappear.